it's such a tough thing, especially with social media and people feeling like they need to know everything. It provides this really difficult culture around these church hurts and these situations because people feel like they should know everything, but then there's also on the other side, like, they want to know so that they can just push you away.
Yes.
Like we can't have anything to do with you. And I think it sets a dangerous precedence for people not being able to watch the redemption story, and people not being able to see, like, oh, like, people can actually turn their life around. This isn't a death sentence.
Hi, welcome to Havilah's podcast. I'm Havilah Cunnington, your host, and we are jumping into the series that we're tackling moral failure in the church. We're looking at the complications, how we can do it better, and maybe even helping those of you that have never experienced it and have a lot of judgment around it, maybe helping you understand the humanity of it, as well as maybe some of the blind spots that we haven't really acknowledged. So I'm really excited about this conversation. In our last episode, I really went through some biblical ideas around this, some structure in which God gives us to handle certain things like this that can be taken well or actually used as control and manipulation. So we looked at all of that. But I felt like it was important that I didn't just teach and train or maybe, talk about the idea, but I wanted to have real conversations around this. And I don't have first experience. And I do have a dear friend that has experience around this. And you know her because she's been on the Enneagram episode podcast. But Debbie Mays, my friend, is here. And she's not just a friend. She's actually part of my leadership team at Wonder. She also is a mom of four kids. She's married and she is a business owner, among other things. Like, this woman she's amazing. She also has her own personal brand. So there's so many things going on. But I mostly love, what I love about Debbie is that there's a part of her story that she's never hid. She's very honest about, and she's really come through it, but she has insight into some of these things that are complicated. And so I couldn't think of anybody else that I wanted to sit and have a conversation with than Debbie. And so I hope that you will listen in, lean in, maybe grab your cup of coffee and just hear, because I think, at least I know Debbie, we're going to have a really good conversation around this. And I'm sure she has some convictions around this. And you're going to hear an accent. Yes, you're going to hear an accent. So Debbie, thanks for being here.
Yay, thanks so much for having me.
I love you so much.
I love you too.
And it is wild when you start going through the list. 4 kids, a husband, a business owner, like so many things. And I love that. But they will hear an accent, and you are, I know everyone's going to guess. But
I know, usually that's how I have to tell people pretty quickly where I'm from, because they're more focused on my accent than anything else. But I grew up in England. I lived in England until I moved to America at 17, but my parents are Irish. And I've lived in America for more than 20 years. So it's all over the place. People in Europe will tell me I sound American.
Right.
People here will be like, where are you from?
Right.
So
right. But Americans love it. And we always like to guess, and we're terrible at it. Mm-hmm. We're like, Australian. You're like, just stop guessing. I know. My brother-in-law is British, and just the amazingness of how people guess. It's like, okay, calm down. Yep. Just ask where they're from. This is not a game show. Yeah. So I want to jump right in because you experienced this in your life, and you experienced it in your leadership season. So I definitely want to talk about other things involved of how do we walk through it and how do we actually do better. But I think context is going to be really important. So maybe give our listeners some context.
Yeah. So my husband and I, we planted a church out of a different ministry in Texas. And we were pastors with a few co-pastors for 5 years. And at that point, after being pastors for about 5 years, I discovered that my husband had an affair. And immediately I knew we had to tell the leaders that were over our church. We had to share it with them. It had been someone outside of our church. It was a business associate that my husband had. And it was something that I found out pretty quickly and immediately after it had taken place. We were actually on vacation with our family when I found out. So we flew back in, and I just was like, okay, we have to let everyone know. We have to be open about this and share it.
And how did you know? Was there any part of you that wanted to hide it right away?
No. Yeah. In our testimony, part of it was that my husband had a porn addiction that had been ongoing, and he had shared it with some of the other leaders, and I knew it would kind of be, we'd get victory for a while, he'd be fine, and then it would kind of resurface. And so I had always felt like there were deeper things going on that needed to be addressed and needed to be helped. So when this came out, it was like, okay, we know for sure, like, you need help. We cannot handle this on our own. But the ministry we were a part of at the time, and just the church that we had, did not believe in counseling. And so the advice they're given is like Paul says, forget what is behind and keep moving forward. And so that's kind of the culture we had created inside of this environment, where if you were dealing with things like pornography, if you were dealing with different things, like, you just needed to pray in the Holy Spirit, move past it, like, just keep going.
Repent and keep going.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just felt like there just needed to be some deep healing. Gabriel had a lot of childhood trauma, and I knew that was a part of it. And so for me, it was like, we have to get this out. And he had said to me, even when I said, we need to go tell everyone, he said, they are going to kick me out. This is going to be terrible. And I'm like, well, maybe they won't. Like, maybe they'll walk, I don't know. I had so much faith in that moment, but he kind of knew just the way that they were. It was a very strict, more controlling religious environment. And so, so I just knew I wanted to get it all out there. I never have wanted to hide any of those things, and just
you're
be
very courageous. And he knew, because usually there's more to the story too, which is usually when someone comes out, there's more. Yeah. So when you go and you reveal to the leaders, did the response, was it how you expected it to be?
Not for me, no. Gabriel was right in that. So he was very much, when I found out, Gabriel immediately was like, I am so sorry, super repentant, kind of like he said, I'm going to do whatever it takes, like whatever they need me to do, I will do. And I was thankful for, at least, because I've heard other people's stories, and I'm like, well, thankfully, at least his response was, I need to do whatever I need to do in this situation. So when we went to the leaders, he actually was asking, like, can I get up on Sunday? Can I tell the church and let them know what has happened? And they obviously had to meet and chat it through as leaders, but they were like, absolutely not. You're not allowed to be around the church. And they basically told him, like, you are a wolf in sheep's clothing, and we can have nothing to do with you immediately. So he was not allowed to talk to any of the people in the church. He wasn't allowed to be around any of them. And they, at that time, I knew that we needed a time of separation. Yeah. For my own self, I felt like I could not live in the same house as Gabriel during this time, which I know can be controversial in the church. I know a lot of people recommend, like, the family all staying together, but there had been so much hurt, and we had gone through so much, that I was like, I knew, like, you need to go and get healthy, and whatever that looks like, go and get healthy. I'm going to take care of the kids and take care of my heart, and then we'll see what happens once you've gotten healthy and once you've dealt with these things. So initially the church said they were going to take care of me and the kids. They were like, we could stay, I could still be part of the ministry that we had. But then over the course of the next few weeks, actually my dad just so happened to have flown into town. Like, we didn't know, like, it was random. It was totally the Lord, but my dad came into town, and he had been a pastor in the Assemblies of God. And he was asking questions like, hey, what's the restoration plan here? Like, do you have a plan for Gabriel? What should he do? And really pushing on, like, you can't just kick him out and, like, you're done. Like, what else is going to happen? And so finally, I think with my dad's prompting, they said, well, he can never be in ministry, he can never be a pastor again, but if for 18 months he goes to a church that we choose, submits to that leadership, and they tell us he's been doing well for 18 months, then maybe we can have relationship with him again. So I was like, great. He said, great, tell me what church, I'll do it. Yeah. And then after a week, the pastor said, I'm not going to give you a church. You have to go and find a church of your own. You have to have that pastor call me, and then maybe we can start talking again.
So they had no plan.
So it was very clear, like, they just did not even want to talk about it. And so when we decided, so we were traveling back to our home, the way that ministry was is you had a lot of people living with you. We lived in community, shared what we had. So by the time we had gotten home, they had moved everyone out of our house. They had met with every person in our church one-on-one and told them the story. And I come to find out that the story that people were told was even embellished and
Debbie.
much different than what actually happened. And so I get home after all of this. My husband is moving out. All of the people that I've been pouring into are out of my house. And
Deb.
it was, yeah. And so
traumatic.
Super traumatic. And then just hearing like everyone in the church has been told what happened.
Yeah.
And I didn't get to be a part of those conversations or be involved in it. And so it just was a really, really painful time because I loved that church. I loved those people. We'd been pastoring for 5 years and they still said like, you can be a part, but it was, very quickly after that, we had constant meetings about what would happen with our finances and what was going to happen here. And within 2 weeks, I was meeting with the main pastor over the whole organization. And he said, well, Debbie, you're called to be a pastor's wife and Gabriel's never going to be a pastor again. So we need to hurry up and find you a husband. And I was like, what? Like, I'm sorry, what? And in that moment, like, it was like,
you're kidding. You're in the middle of trauma. They've talked to everybody. You're trying to recover. You've got four kids.
Yeah. My daughter was 6 weeks old at the time.
6 weeks old. And then he's saying, we got to move your life along. Are you just sitting there shell shocked?
I couldn't believe it. And there had been throughout this process, certain moments that were like a shock to me, that where these pastors would say something, or they'd be like, you know, they ended up sending Gabriel a bill for like everything they told me they had paid for. And so there were moments where I was like, hold up, like this isn't right too. Like, I know that what Gabriel has done is wrong, of course, and he needs to go and get healing. But the response was so shocking to me in this community. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, I want you to look for the fruit of the Spirit in all of these meetings. And I just started to do that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like they're mean, the way that they were talking about Gabriel, and it was just awful. And so finally, after a few weeks, I called the pastor's wife, who had been my mentor for 10 plus years. And I said, hey, like, I know what Gabriel has done is wrong, but I really don't think, like, I have some big concerns about the way you guys are handling this situation. I don't think that it's right. I'm really like, it's not being handled in a godly way.
Right.
And she was really upset with that response. And I said, I disagree with him. And she kept saying, well, you just, you're being manipulated by him. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm actually, like, I'm not talking to him.
Right.
I'm actually listening to the Holy Spirit. And this is not, you're not behaving like, I feel like, in a biblical way here. And she said, well, if you disagree with us, then we can have nothing to do with you either. And so, like, you're done also. So at that point,
so you lose everything.
So then they told everyone in the church that now nobody could talk to me either. So I had no church community. My husband has moved away to go get healthy, and I have my 4 kids and
a 6-month-old,
the 6-week-old, yeah. And all of my community was gone in that moment.
Debbie, I'm sorry. Everyone that's listening or watching is probably like, oh my gosh, because this wasn't people that you didn't love or know or had been. I mean, you were in full relationship. Mm-hmm. And did you have any idea that they would do that? Had you seen that kind of pattern before?
I think so. I think that it was very much the leaders would hear from the Lord for you in your life. And if you disagreed, then it was like, whoa, like we're hearing from the Lord. We're your covering.
Right.
A lot of the language was the pastors are your covering. They hear from the Lord. So people, if you wanted to move away, you had to talk to the pastor about it, and they would have to confirm that that was the word of the Lord. And anytime people would leave, it's like, oh, they're away from God now. They're not hearing the voice of the Lord. And so there was definitely a community of, if you're not on board with everything that we're saying, then you're not hearing from the Lord and you're disobedient. So we can't talk to you anymore. So I was surprised that it would happen to me in such a vulnerable time. Yeah. I was thinking like they'll still.
And even a woman watching a woman with another 6-week-old, like any woman would naturally go, this woman is not even in her right mind. No empathy, no compassion.
Right. Yeah.
To understand that this isn't just, we're dealing with somebody, but this is a human being that has 4 kids that, I mean, everything in her life was connected. Mm-hmm. And then you're just you're just cutting off. Yeah. I'm curious, as you've watched a lot of these things happen right now in the church, like we're seeing a lot of, different environments do different things. But I think one of the things that's been surprising is you're not hearing from a lot of the men that have had failures or things that have happened.
Right.
Do you think, as you've watched this, that there's a lot of just silencing, that they're being cut off and shut down without having an opportunity to say something? And again, that's just in perception.
Yeah.
I mean, this is allegedly, I don't have the.
I know. It's a really tough thing, especially for someone who is truly repentant and says like, I want to own this. I want to change. There's just not a lot of room for how to handle them. And what I've seen, even with a lot of the spouses and the children, there's not a lot of care and thought for how are we protecting her and her children, whether she wants to stay with him or whether she wants to leave. Either way,
right.
It's such a tough thing, especially with social media and people feeling like they need to know everything. It provides this really difficult culture around these church hurts and these situations because people feel like they should know everything, but then there's also on the other side, like, they want to know so that they can just push you away.
Yes.
Like we can't have anything to do with you. And I think it sets a dangerous precedence for people not being able to watch the redemption story, and people not being able to see like, oh, like people can actually turn their life around. This isn't a death sentence.
Right.
This isn't something that like you're never going to be a pastor or you're never going to be in ministry again, and you're just kind of pushed off and hidden away. And it's kind of sad for the church because we don't get to see the good stories, and people actually have the opportunity to turn their life around. Yeah,
it's interesting. I have a friend that when she had really came to realize that her husband, who was a pastor, was living a double life and was addicted to pornography and things like that, she was told, well, you're his accountability partner. So she lived another 5 years in the house. Wow. With the idea that, and this is what leaders do, is, well, then you have to, he's repentant, so you now have to manage. And so, I think about those that are listening or watching, like, that is just so destructive that as a wife or as a husband, you're not called to help maintain their weakness like this, or to keep them from. They're powerful people, but I think it can get really complicated. And so in the middle of all of this, what surprised you about people's responses, both inside the church and outside? You have family, you have friends, I assume you have other. What was surprising about their responses?
I think what was surprising to me, specifically with family and friends that were outside of that community, they were so loving, very much helpful. My dad, like I said, was there, and then my mom flew in a few weeks later to be with me during that time. And I had one friend at that time who I had met her at the school bus stop. She's the only person I knew that wasn't in our church. Yes. And she came over and I shared everything with her. And I just remember her, like, she literally got on her hands and knees and like put her hands on my feet and just prayed for me. And was just crying, and it was like she was my only person in that time period. And I'll never forget how supportive she was. And we ended up going to church with her over the next few months and stuff, and just having those lifelines of people that weren't there to say, oh my gosh, Gabriel's so terrible, like blah, blah, blah. It was just like, how can I support you in this situation? How can I be a good friend to you? And so that was so healing for me to have like at least one person that I knew that was supportive and there for me. But my family was great. They were very supportive. And throughout the journey, my family was on the same page about like, hey, we're just going to see what happens. Like, you don't have to sign up and say, this is the decision forever. It very much was like, let's just see how this plays out.
Did you feel like people wanted you to make that decision? Did you feel like there was a sense of, what are you going to do?
Yeah. And there was very much people who felt like us being separated was a really bad idea. Even still, I get comments sometimes about me talking about how I wanted to be physically separated, thinking like, oh, if you physically separate, then you're done for. And I'm actually, I completely disagree, having gone through it myself. I think if we had tried to live together and me see him every single day and parent alongside one another with all of that hurt, I think we would have had a worse story and a worse outcome, because I would have been reminded every single day his presence being around me. Whereas having a time of physical separation allowed me to heal, to get my own space, to get my bearings, and really hear from the Lord on what was next for my life. And then when we came back, basically, I said, when we had gone through the journey of, we went to marriage counseling separate for a while, and then he was still living separately while we still attended marriage counseling. And I said, like, if we're getting back together, like, I'm not the same woman. Like, this is not like we're just picking up where we left off. Like, this is a new marriage, and I am a completely different person, and I want to make sure that you know that when we get back together, we are different people. Like, I am not the same person. And that was really healthy for us, because there was a lot of codependency and a lot of things that I wanted to know on my part. Like, of course, I was not to blame at all for the affair, but there were things inside of me, things I put up with, things I didn't say, codependency, me becoming the one who felt like I needed to find the porn and catch him in it, that were very unhealthy cycles that needed to be broken.
Right.
And we needed to come back together afresh without all of that.
I totally agree.
Codependency.
The autonomy, like, we go into marriage with autonomy, even though we become one, there is that sense of, wait, who am I? Now that all this has happened, I need to get back to who Debbie is and what kind of mom I want to be, and what is God saying, which I think is really important, because God does leave us powerful.
Yeah.
He doesn't disempower us. Even when somebody, makes a tragic mistake, it's like he still wanted you to find you in the middle of it. And I do see that at times where, when people just kind of, well, let's keep going, there's this sense of, who am I? And I don't even have a right to be sad, because we've repented and we're moving forward, but it takes time. So I think being separate is actually a representation of what's happening in the spirit for a minute. It gives like kind of a picture of really what's happening. Like, you need to see who you are and who I am and come together. Now, I'm curious, after this, how did you deal with the cruelty, honestly, of the church? How did you deal with that, with your relationship with the church in the global church,
right?
The big C, because that a lot of people would just walk away.
I think for me, I already had such a foundation of my relationship with the Lord. And I mean, I've been in church my whole life. I became a Christian at 5 years old. My dad was a pastor. And so I really was able to disconnect these people and their choices from my relationship with the Lord and what he wants. And that was really helpful. Just recognizing, like, people are going to make terrible decisions. They're doing the best that they know what to do in the time. But that isn't a representation, even though we're supposed to be a representation of Jesus, that isn't a representation of the heart of God and of what he wants us to do. And so in my journey with the church as a whole, just recognizing that there are always going to be unhealthy people in churches. Like, the Lord brings us to places to be healed. And he's always, what I've seen happen in many people's lives, and my husband's included, is he brings you to these like points of, like, you're rubbing up against your sin, you're rubbing up against those attitudes or those behaviors that he's giving you the opportunity to change. And I see him in many people's journeys get louder with it. And he's like, hello, like, this is the thing you need to work on. I really need you to work on this. And you can just choose to not listen to those things. And I've watched people choose to continue to not listen and to continue to just, it's like the warning signal is going off louder and louder. And you want to make those choices. But I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for other people's relationships with the Lord. I'm not responsible for how they respond. And having, for me, that clear delineation between, I'm doing the best that I can do with what I know the Lord has put on my heart to do. And with my kids, like, teaching them, like, hey, if other people make different choices, that's okay. It's not my business. They're going to be the ones that stand before Jesus. And I set boundaries in those situations so that I'm protected, my kids are protected, but it's not my job to judge what other Christians do,
how they live.
They're going to have different choices, and God's going to have to deal with them, but it's not my responsibility to be someone else's like moral compass and like, you're doing wrong, which I find that so interesting about culture now. It does feel very much like we feel like we have to call everyone out.
Yes, we monitor.
And I'm just like, that's so stressful.
It is.
It's so stressful.
And you reap what you sow. I always think if you're judging others, you're either hiding because you are deflecting from what, or it's going to come at you. If you're criticizing, judging, looking for fault, like if that's the culture in which you're creating around yourself, then don't be surprised if it comes back at you, because the Bible says we reap what we sow. Yeah. So if we reap empathy and grace and forgiveness, and, you know, it doesn't mean we have a bad boundary, but it is, you know, we do, when, you know, we say, no, we don't let bad things into our world, and we protect that. But I'm curious, for someone who's watching this or listening and they're like, okay, what do I do if a friend comes to me or a leader comes to me? What's the best thing I can do? What's the best thing I could say for that man or that woman that's coming to me? Yeah. That isn't the one that has breached the trust, but it's the one that's really the victim of what the choice has been. Yeah. I would say just be there for them, offer empathy. You know, there's not really anything that you can do in a situation like that other than, I'm here. Do you need meals? Do you need me to take your kids on a walk so that you can have time by yourself? I would say that one of the major things my friend helped me with was giving me, like, she would take the kids to the park so that I could just have time by myself, just to process and grieve and cry, and then just giving space for them to be able to grieve and cry. I would say on a practical, you know, standpoint, just not rushing. They don't have to rush any kind of decision. They don't have to, you know, you don't have to decide what to do immediately and make lifelong choices, you know, when you're hurting. I would say give it time. You know, I have a lot of people that come to me and ask me for advice, like, you know, they're 6 weeks out and they're like, when should I start sharing my story with people? And I'm like, hold up. It's almost like you've given birth to a baby. Like, this new situation, it's like you're waking up every 3 hours, you're exhausted, you're miserable. Like, you just need time to just settle, time to seek the Lord, hear from it. And then every situation is so unique. There's no way you can say, like, oh, you know, A plus B equals C. It's just every situation is unique, whether they need safety and a place to go, if it's not a healthy or safe environment for them, you know, not feeling bad about what they need. If they need to leave the house because they don't feel safe or it's not healthy, that's fine. Like, what do you need right now? What's the worst thing someone can say or do? I mean, obviously the opposite side is, what are you going to do? We can have nothing to do with you. No, really. I think, you know, leaving them alone. I mean, is that, because people do want to give privacy. You know, I look at it as a death. It's like the marriage you had is dead. And this woman is going through, this man is going through a death of what it is. And so, you know, it's like the person who loses a child and goes, we're going to try again. And you're like, okay, give it you're welcome to do that, but just give it a minute. You haven't even got through the moment of your life, you know, and so, or loss or whatever. So what's the worst thing that obviously people want to leave space. Right. But I would say that too. Yeah. I mean, everyone's different, but for me, the awkwardness and the space felt like I have done something wrong. Yeah. And so there being a lifeline and connection of just, hey, we're here. Let me know what I can do, offering things rather than just like, hey, so sorry, let me know. It's like, can I bring you dinner on Tuesday? Can I take your kids for you? Is that okay? Are you comfortable? The worst thing you can do is be pushy. In any aspect, pushing to make a decision, pushing for, you know, what your opinion should be. That it's that pushiness that feels like I'm rushed and I'm under pressure, and that's the worst thing you can do. I'm already failing. My life is blown up, and now you want me to make a decision. Because you can't. Your brain is just all over the place. No. It took a good few weeks for me to even, like, at one point I told Gabriel, and when everything happened with the church, I told him, like, I don't want to talk to you for 2 straight weeks because I just need my head to be cleared. No other voices. I just need to hear from the Lord. And he had called me about something with the kids after like 3 days. And I picked up the phone and I said, I told you it was 2 weeks. The 2 weeks starts over right now. Like, I need you to not talk to me for 2 weeks. Yep. And so getting that space for me to just clear my head was so key. Which is amazing. I mean, and I hope that people are hearing this, because it is not mean or cruel, or you're not, you know, anti-restoration. It is okay to take a minute and just spend even a month, or it just, you know, I think the main thing is I warn people that if you are in crisis, don't go find another relationship. I've seen a lot of people do
100%.
that, where they separate and then they're, cultivating a relationship. And I'm thinking, if you really are done with this relationship, make sure you close the door to that in a sacred way, in a holy way, in a pure way.
Yeah.
And then if it's real with this other person, then God will do that. But that kind of idea that this person's going to save the day is often really leaves a whole different set of mess.
Yes.
So as we kind of wrap up, I'm curious, what can the church do better when it comes to these things? Because I think we're going to see more and more of this. I mean, I was looking at a recent movie star, and they had a prenup. And the prenup was adultery, and then it said digital adultery,
Wow.
and I thought, wow, even in prenups, they're starting to put digital adultery and digital. And I thought, we are just getting started in what this is going to look like as a culture. We are going to have more and more. And I'm not trying to prophesy it, but I think the idea that if we keep hiding, because I guarantee that 50 to 70% of people in our world have had some kind of breach, right, within their marriage, whether it be digital, emotional, physical, something. And again, that I could probably look the stats up. But when we just look at it as intercourse breach, that's it. Like that's not enough. There's so many other breaches. And so I think when we act like it's the big thing, when really people are going through breaches all along the way, we need to have better restoration and better ways to do that. So I'm curious, now having years of thought and process, what would have been a better way to have restored both of you?
Yeah, I think that the major thing is that initial response of just, we can't have anything to do with you. I think that putting people just out, throwing them out, like there's no hope for you, your life is over, is just not the message of Jesus at all. So, and I think it's difficult too, because you have a lot of non-denominational churches and people popping up, and there's no process for what should happen. And I think that church leaders really need to start thinking through, like, what actually in a restoration process should happen. Is the person repentant or not? And I would say for me, having gone through it very clearly, someone who is genuinely repentant is willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. That is the heart posture. I mean, of course they'd be upset or angry, but it's like the heart posture is, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. So being able to share with the church and open and honest about what they have done, being able to, go for counseling and a time period of therapy and whatever they need to get healthy to move past it. But I think saying, we're done with you is the worst thing that you can do, even if that means our church community cannot handle you being around because this is too painful. So we're going to have you go here or this sister church or this other ministry where you can just attend, where you can be, be in not in ministry, but in connection with other people, being held accountable, and being able to provide steps like, here are some benchmarks for what we're looking for. And if you go through these things and if you show over a period of time that you're genuinely repentant and you're changing, then we'll see what can happen. But I just think that there's no process in place for people right now. And I think that the whole idea of the cancel culture and just like putting this person up, I think it's so dangerous, especially when I think of the wives and the children who they not only are going through this grief within their family unit, but then the entire world knows about it. And the entire world is watching. And that's sad to me. I think there are, obviously, if somebody has had a long-standing pattern of behavior, there are, of course, people need to know about it. People need to be protected from that person. But I think in terms of a moral failure for someone who is dealing with pornography or affair, I don't know that it's the world's business for that spouse and for those kids to have to deal with.
I do too. And I think that's something that, I wish we had time to talk about all that, but I do think that that is the decision of the spouse to make a decision if she wants this public or not. And if the husband is repentant and it's led with the right leaders that are safe, I don't think that this person is a predator. I do not think that this person is, does that make sense?
Yes,
I think
definitely.
we need to be very careful that we don't act like whoever has had a breach. Now we should all know about, no, we don't have to all know about, as long as we know that they're held accountable, that they've noted it, that they've gone through restoration. I personally think that in a world that cancels people so quickly and labels people, I think it'd be better for us at times to just, and again, patterns are different.
Yeah.
A breach or a pattern is very different.
Yep.
Now, a breach can be a pattern if it's not dealt with. So you and I both know that. But I
Yep.
do think a way that people can feel safe and not feel like their livelihood's at stake, their whole family. I mean, it just, and again, a lot of what we've seen is just an implosion because of the weight and the influence and all the things that are coming at these men. But in general, those are a 0.1% of the
Right.
men and women that are dealing with this on a regular basis in church
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
So I would say, in my opinion, go to a counselor first,
Yep.
a Christian counselor, and say, we are going to be talking to our leaders about this. We want to get this out. How do you recommend doing that? I do think that there is, again, if you're a pastor on staff, then yes, you have to go and confess and share.
Yep.
But if you're just part of a culture, I think it's important that you don't just, the exposing is not the healing. And I think people get that mixed up. Like, I'm just going to tell them it'll be fine. But if you know there's no process, then you have to actually create your own process by saying, okay, I'm going to meet my counselor. I'm going to meet with these couples. I'm going to figure this out. And then, I just, it makes me sad that people get stuck in all of that process. And
And I think too, especially with like what we saw was that this was predicated by pornography use. And I think if we back up a lot of these situations, you will find that it's pornography that comes in and then that's not dealt with, and it's kind of and it gets worse and worse. And so I would say at the beginning stages, having a culture where your pastors can admit to pornography use without fear, can admit to like those, the thing that I say is give me a seed, don't give me a tree. Like I want to know if you're dealing with something when it's seed form, when it's small and we can handle it, we can get you counseling, we can go the right step. But so many times this seed is germinating inside of them. They know they should tell. They feel like they're going to lose their job if they tell. They can't. And then before you know it, it's this massive tree that is damaging so many other people. And so there has to be that culture and that help for pastors and people in the community that are dealing with pornography that's not shame-based. There's something wrong with you, but like this is something that so many people deal with, and there has to be processes in place for that so that you can cut it off at that point.
I totally agree. And we are just on the brink of all of this. Debbie, I want to thank you for being with us today. And I know your story has so many layers, and we hit like the first layer.
It's so true.
And but I'm grateful for your vulnerability. And for those of you that are watching today, and maybe you're in the middle of it and you're feeling, maybe you relate to Debbie's story of like, you were mishandled by church, you're mishandled by a parent or a leader or somebody, and they didn't see you in the middle of it. They saw that they were going to fix it, solve it, and you were a problem to be dealt with. I want you to know that wasn't the heart of God, that he loves you, that he would have cared for you, and he does care for you in a way that you would have kept your dignity, your respect, and your connection and community. So if that's you, I want to just say I'm sorry on behalf of poor, bad leaders that didn't love you well or see you or serve you and your kids. And if you're in the process right now where you have someone that's confessed to you and you're trying to figure that out, or maybe you're a pastor or a leader and you're saying, we've got to get this together, I think it's really important that you go to work. You take some time as a leadership team and you say, it's not when, it's if. And so what is our process to make sure that we've protected people as a shepherd does to their sheep, not as something just to be dealt with, but actually nurtured? So these woundings will come. How do we protect the kids, protect the wife, along with healing and even exposing addiction or exposing sickness within that relationship? So again, I wish it was just a quick fix. I think that this is a problem that gets attention, that gets managed. And I hope that you found some freedom today and permission to talk about it. I hope that you heard what Debbie shared about what she needed as a woman going through something like this. So if you know a man or woman, I hope that that gave you some tips on that situation. And if nothing else, we don't have all the answers, but we're trying to ask some really good questions and we're trying to find some answers for some of these complicated topics. You guys, thanks for being here today. Again, Debbie, thanks for being here. And next week, we're going to jump back in to this series on moral failure in the church. And I really hope that you will, well, leave us a comment. Honestly, if you like this and you have questions or something you'd like us to address or something that you think we need to say better, or you really liked how we said it, let us know, because we really don't know unless you comment. So make sure you comment, you like, subscribe. That really helps us. If nothing else, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.